I've never talked about this before on show, I don't think, but one of the reasons I think that Babylon 5 Season 5 has a bit of a negative opinion amongst B5 fans is because it was B5 again. Let me explain what I mean by that. Season 1, that's kind of a mixed bag, and people have varying opinions on that one, but the long and the short of it is, whether you like it or not, it did kind of have to build up to things. You know, there was some establishment, there was some foreshadowing, there was characters, you're starting to learn who the characters are and what they were and why they were, the setting, the people, the politics. And then Season 2, well, kind of the end of Season 1, but basically in Season 2, things kicked off and we started moving forward with the intended plot arcs of the show from that point onward, effectively culminating with the end of Season 4. Season 5 is doing all of that again in one season instead of 4. If you've been paying attention for the last, I guess, 8 episodes, has been trying to establish these 2 new thread arcs, these new plot arcs. I don't know how much of these were planned way in advance, back when JMS and the other people working on this sat down and wrote the original Babylon 5 arc and the Bible that they wrote for the show. But the 2 arcs are very clearly demonstrated here in this episode, and the thing is, as much as, like I just said, it's these 2 arcs that are being established in one season rather than 4, but rather than feeling rushed, they feel sluggish. It is now episode 9, and we are only just now actually moving forward with both arcs. The rogue telepaths are effectively in open revolt. We haven't actually seen the revolt start, but they have divided. There are now 2 rogue telepath groups, one of which is peacefully resisting and one of which is violently resisting. And, well, we see the continuation and culmination of what's going on. I should start, not culmination, wrong word. The continuation and establishment of what's going on with the Drakh and the Keepers and, of course, the Centauri. But that took us 9 episodes to get there, and again, the pace feels a little bit plodding, as if they had another 3 seasons to fully stretch out these arcs, rather than 1. I'm not sure how much of that was deliberate or not. I'm really not. And I'm not sure what to make of it. One of the things I noted about this episode, and this is probably, I think, the first time I've actually really commented on this, was the usage of the background music throughout the episode. Now, there has been good usage of music for scenes or for moments, but continuously throughout this episode there was this sort of ominous, dreadful, fearful music playing in the background, almost for the entire bit, every scene, with only a couple of exceptions. Now, that's kind of unusual for B5. And it gave me the impression of someone walking up and saying, "Psst, hey, bad stuff's happening. Come on, get ready for it." And I'm like, wait, what? Now, that sounds derogatory. And it is. But it's not as derogatory as it probably sounds. Because the music was well placed, worked, and did make me feel invested. But that's my point. Now, on episode 9, I think. We're on episode 9, right? Let me double check my notes here real quick. Because the show order is weird, so I got to verify. Yes, episode 9. Now, in episode 9, I finally feel like something's happening. I haven't for the last 8. It would be as if you're just kind of like zoning out as you're doing something, and all of a sudden, oh my god, stuff's happening now. That's kind of how I feel this. I haven't been invested until now. I haven't been all that particularly caring about the telepath plight or what's going on with them, the Centauri situation, the Drakh and the Keepers. I mean, it's there and it's horrifying, but they haven't actually done anything with it. I felt like we're just kind of meandering rather than establishing. And then now it's like, oh, okay, we're done meandering. We have reached meander, quota. Pakong! And then stuff just starts happening. It's weird. So obviously there's 2 plot arcs here. One on B5 about the telepaths, one on Centauri Prime about the Centauri. I want to talk about military strategy really quick, though. Obviously, I'm the kind of person who tends to lean towards the military ideal and towards the concept of conquest rather than destruction. As I've said many times, I tend to be more of a Revan than I am a Malik. But I do also acknowledge that there is a very valid purpose behind causing widespread destruction. I hate the concept. In fact, I loathe the idea. World War II is probably the best real-life example of what I'm talking about here. Think about how many hundreds, if not thousands, if not more, tons of goods, material, produce, valuable resources that basically can't be replaced went to the bottom of the ocean during World War II. Think about that just for a minute. All of that is wasted. It is gone. It has been removed from the equation. Now, on this global scale, that's not something that's really significant, but I don't know, the me in me looks at that and just thinks, God, what an enormous, colossal, horrific waste. Surely there's another way. And in fact, there were other ways to deal with the shipping problems, to try and cut off the artery of Britain during the early stages of World War II. And of course, this sort of thing was happening in the Pacific as well. And I just look at that like, God, why? But from a purely tactics perspective, taking out of it any concept of morality, taking out of it any concept of, responsibility or dealing with the future or consequences, from a purely military perspective, there's actually a lot to be said about annihilating a convoy utterly. But what I want to ask you, and I don't want anyone to actually answer this in comments because obviously this is spoilers territory, but why? Why do the Drakh, the servants of the shadows, who are gone, who are controlling the Centauri, why are they using the Centauri fleet to make this happen? What is their purpose? Now, for those of you watching this show live, as in who don't know the answer to that question, I would love to hear your thoughts on why you think they're doing it. I hesitate to even speculate out loud because, obviously, I mean, that would cause issues, right? But it's the question, I mention this because it's the question that just burns in my mind when watching this episode. Why? I mean, yeah, you're the bad guys, but this is Babylon 5. Very, very rarely do the bad guys do bad guy things because bad guys got a bad guy, right? Anyways. G'Kar is brilliant in this episode. I know that's a shock, but I love how both Andreas Katsoulas and I just lost his name. The guy who plays Londo, both are excellent. A two-man act, as I've said many, many, many times before. But also in character, Londo and G'Kar are an excellent team. Peter Jurassic, that's his name. Don't send me 50 comments telling me his name. I got it. I figured it out without even looking it up. I love the idea of this because it's something that it's come up so many times as I've analyzed fiction over the last umpteen years. The idea of what would happen if Shepard and Saren had united, right? What if the Fellowship and Saruman had actually been on the same side, I mean, this goes back a while. That's why I used the Lord of the Rings example. There are so many examples in fiction where the bad guy, or a bad guy, or an antagonist, could have allied with one of the protagonists, or the main protagonists, and the result would be this unstoppable dynamo. And of course, that's one of the reasons why that doesn't happen. This is a rare instance of that happening. Obviously, antagonist-protagonist doesn't quite fit. But if you think about it, if you sit back for a moment, Londo and G'Kar, in character, match each other's skill sets almost perfectly. Londo is a brilliant politician, a great long-term thinker, very smart, very observant. He knows how to manipulate, but also he knows why those manipulations work. He understands the underpinnings and therefore can better work on the surface. G'Kar is a master of rhetoric. He is the kind of person who can face a challenge political or martial. He is big, strong, not exactly unused to a fight, and very observant and very skilled. I love the scene where one of the ministers pretty much just hands G'Kar the guy who whipped him, and the whip that whipped him, and says, "Go for it." And I love the fact that G'Kar is tempted. Of course he is. You would be too. I would be too. And I don't like pain. I despise the concept of inflicting pain, but I am human enough to admit that if someone had whipped me almost to death, I would be tempted to revenge upon them. But G'Kar doesn't, because he's not just a big, dumb bodyguard. He is, in fact, very skilled and has tremendous acumen within, I hesitate to say political circles, but it's more diplomatic circles. There's a gray area there, which G'Kar is more skilled at, and Londo is more skilled at the other one. And again, their skills complement each other. Also, nice little touch when he winks at the Centauri woman. For those of you who don't remember, G'Kar actually does have, let's just say, a hell of an appetite for women. And let's just leave it like that. So, that amused me. I also like how the fact that she was like, oh, no. Also, I love how G'Kar just is gloating half the time when he's dealing with the others, just basking in it. One of the things I also like, though, about the dynamic between G'Kar and Londo, first of all, obviously the two are effectively friends, arguably even close friends at this point in time, whether they admit it or not. But the thing I like is that for all of the jibes and for all the witticisms, and for all the fact that G'Kar is basically just having a ball with this, he takes his job very seriously. Very seriously. In truth, I'm actually a little bit surprised that G'Kar was not able to stop the attack on Londo Mollari by Minister I'm Evil. I can't remember his name. I'm honestly am. I mean, the whole attack was literally a ploy to separate Londo from his bodyguard and then kill him. I mention this, though, because that scene really helps to emphasize that G'Kar is like, no, we're dealing with this. I'm going to save your life. And he literally turns around to fight three guys in a manner that emphasizes that G'Kar is in that moment willing to die, if necessary, in order to save Londo's life. That says a lot right there. So, everything that is said about the Regent, first from the head of military gentleman, and then later when they actually talk with the Regent, makes perfect sense. But it only really makes perfect sense if either you know, and you're thinking about it, or you're on your second viewing of the show. It's brilliant writing, really, because it's written in such a way that your first time through you could very much be forgiven for looking at it as gibbering nonsense, a man who's losing his mind. And the actor sells that, by the way. The actor acts as if he is losing it, like he flat out has Alzheimer's or something similar. But instead, we listen to what he's saying, and it's horrifying. I've said before, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person who thinks this, that the single most horrifying and terrifying and awful thing in all of B5 are the goddamn keepers. And this episode helps to emphasize that. Earlier, the military gentleman is briefing, if you will, Londo on his suspicions, and he mentions how the Regent will meet someone and says he has to tell them something very important, but then a fog goes over his eyes and he has to wander off without telling them anything. It is actually an age-old horror trope, being trapped within your own mind, or, if you will, being trapped within your own body, unable to do anything. Yeah, that just... ugh. I don't even want to think about that anymore. I'm just going to move on. Let's move to the B-plot, or the A-plot, or whatever the other plot is. The damn telepaths. Now, I think I've made it pretty clear through several of the previous episodes why the telepath situation is what I like to call a sticky situation. It's not great. They got a lot of potential problems there. It doesn't help that, as I mentioned, they are effectively two groups of rogue telepaths now. So the best part is they're probably not going to be acknowledged as such by outside forces. So they're just going to see rogue telepaths, and when they see violent uprising, they'll be like, oh my god, all the telepaths. You can see how this kind of goes bad in a hurry here. So, let's talk about Byron's strategy first. His strategy is that upon learning about the fact that they were built as tools to help fight the shadows, not literally, by the way, that's actually worthy of note. It's not like they picked up Byron and his agents, pulled them over into a lab, and modified them. what the Vorlons did is slightly different and significantly different, but it's still bad. Don't mistake me. I do get Byron's cause quite a bit, but the point is they modified the human race, and by unlucky lottery, the lawnmower is going by. By unlucky lottery, Byron and his people just happen to be the ones who happen to be selected to be part of this genetic deformity. Also, one interesting note, if I may, really quick. Byron mentions how other races, have telepaths and natural-born telepaths. From what I understand of the lore of Babylon 5, that's actually not true. Like, there was a whole discussion, and there was a bit of setting building about the idea that nobody who is a natural-born telepath has sentience and sapience, isn't an intelligent race, because they don't need to be. The idea being that you don't have an evolutionary tendency towards intelligence, because intelligence has to serve a function, as anything does from an evolutionary perspective. Ergo, you'd only evolve to grow more intelligent as a species if it gave you some advantage. If you're a telepath, you don't need intellect. You have the advantage you need. It's the same general conceit behind why things like, terrifying sharks or powerful tigers or whatever do not have sentience and sapience like human beings do, because they didn't need it to survive. All of this, of course, could get into some sticky stuff, but within the setting of the show, that's been made fairly clear. Anyways, maybe Byron's just being trying to be a master of rhetoric, which is another thing I want to bring up, by the way. G'Kar is a master of rhetoric. He's someone who could get up there and speechify off the top of his head and just bam, and nail someone verbally. That whole diplomatic thing, right? His charisma score is through the roof. Byron is terrible at it. Byron is what I would call a first-year debate student. And I am willing to admit that I probably employ some of the same strategies he does when I actually have to get into kind of a rhetoric contest myself, because I'm not actually good at rhetoric. I can analyze it and recognize it, but I'm not good at going up there and being like, "Fatah!" Not like G'Kar is. So he mentions, and I wrote down a couple of specific notes here. He goes on, and his shifts as he's talking, he starts off saying, the Vorlons did this. And then the next time he brings it up, it says, the Alliance benefited from this. And the next time he said it says, the people who we helped. And he just slowly, over the course of his argument, shifts the direct focal point of blame from the Vorlons straight onto the Alliance. Now, something could be said legitimately for the idea that the Alliance has benefited from the psychics and therefore owes them something. That's actually something that's very reasonable, and I'll talk about that in a second, too. But that's not how he phrases it. He tries to slant his argument as if the Vorlons made us this way. Shift, shift, shift. The Alliance made us this way. And he tries to shift that blame onto them as if they were the ones who, metaphorically speaking, pulled the trigger. Then he mentioned something, and I had to rewind and write this word for word. He mentions how now we've been discarded and caged, and he compares the work to, and I quote, a kind of slave labor. No offense, buddy, but I think real-life slaves, or I shouldn't say real-life, let's not get into that. I think slaves within the setting would like to have a word with you about what slavery means. Now, of course, this is, again, a first-year debate student type of rhetoric. It's the type where you say something that doesn't actually mean anything. A kind of slavery? I'm doing a kind of slavery right now, sitting in front of this camera, talking to you. I am. You could stretch that definition, and that's the point. It doesn't frickin' mean anything. But you say it like that to incite. You say it like that to try and specifically target words that are emotionally charged and therefore get a reaction out of your audience. It's something I actually try very hard not to do, because I don't like that kind of crap. It's actually one of the reasons I've had this no politics role on my show for so long, is because most people, my experience, not telling anyone else says it, but in my experience, most people can't discuss real issues without doing that exact thing. A kind of slavery. I wanted to smack him when he said that. Now, that's not saying that there aren't, want to call them scions. God, I've been doing Primus stuff today, forgive me. Psychics, telepaths, teeps out there who have been straight up enslaved. And there are ones who have been employed. And there are ones who have been helped and taken care of and given to. You see why I bring this up? This is my problem with Byron here, and I've kind of been building to this over the last several episodes. Byron is an idiot. He is a charged, charismatic cult leader, basically. I mean, I hate to say that because I mean it as a derogatory, but he's the kind of person who doesn't really have a long-term plan in mind, who isn't really thinking about the specifics of leadership. He's not a good manager, he's not a good administrator, he's not a good leader. What he is he's a flag. And now you know why I brought that up all those episodes ago. Because that really is all Byron is to basically this entire situation. You note, by the way, right at the end, he makes this comment to Lita. You know, when I say you need to run, you need to run. You realize he's already preparing to martyr himself, right? He's already prepped for that in his mind. I mean, really? And this brings up something. I actually dislike parts of this episode because for one of the first times, probably ever in B5, I feel like B5 is preaching just a little bit. It's not a lot. It's nowhere near to the level of, say, Enterprise or early Voyager, but it is a little preachy. Because Sheridan is right. What Byron did was straight up wrong, and I'm not even talking about the fact that I personally tend to think that constantly following the rules and following procedure won't always work. That is what I legitimately believe in real life, and I think that going through the proper channels doesn't always work. 'Cause it doesn't. But I also think that going the flippin' opposite direction and basically blackmailing and lying your way into a meeting with the heads of state and then blackmailing the heads of state is not the way to go about this. The irony of all this is Byron himself is the one who says that they must not go too far and resort to violence. But of course that makes sense. Because Byron is not actually that smart. See, if you've been paying attention, he, as I mentioned many times, is very analogous to Bester. He thinks he's better than mundanes. And his big distinction point, because if you notice, real quick, just about every person out there, not 100%, but just about every person out there, and I've seen this in real life and in fiction, who thinks they're better than someone else, usually points to a specific thing. One clearly definable difference between me and you. And that's what makes me better. In Byron's case, it's violence. We actually see another example of that in this episode, with the Centauri who look down on G'Kar. Why? Is it because he's stupid? No, G'Kar's brilliant. Is it because he's not charismatic? No, he's got charisma in spades. Is it because he doesn't know how to have decorum? Actually, he's quite nice and polite in just about every circumstance. No, it's because he's a Narn. It's that clear, definable point. You can't argue with that. You can't argue with the fact that he's a Narn. And therefore, because you're a Narn and I'm a Centauri, I'm better than you. Duh, QED. But that's exactly what Byron does. He's willing to blackmail, to coerce, to force, to... He is willing to be verbally violent. Let me put it that way. But the one defined thing that he can point to and say, nope, is because he, himself at least, and some of his followers, don't actually engage in physical violence. He says, nope, that's the line. That's what makes us better than them. And he clings to that like a goddamn safety blanket. Sorry, if it's not obvious, I don't like Byron that much. No offense to the actor. The actor's great, ever since the first episode, but the character makes me want to slap him a couple of times. So, he could have used this opportunity, and this is what, when I was first seeing this, I thought was actually going to happen. He could have used this opportunity to plead with them, to say, we have given so much of ourselves, we seek an audience with you for the possibility of our own settlement, our own colony world. He could have... Something I've learned a long time ago is if you're going to try and reach someone, generally you have to be prepared to reach more than halfway. That's a very simple version of it, but I've found that to be true in virtually all aspects of life. He could have done all the prep work, figured out which worlds were possible, say this world, this world, this world. Over here, this one by this trade lane, so we'd still have access to the rest of the world. We could do this place, maybe this space station that's abandoned, something. Do that prep work. Come to them with a prepared proposal and say, here, we are requesting this. Maybe even be part of a protectorate, I guess is the word I want to use here, under the alliance. We will still submit to your overall laws and rules. We're just going to be over there in the corner. Now, of course, Byron would never go with that. But under these circumstances, all it would effectively mean is they keep their nose clean, and if someone goes after them militarily, they can call for help. I may not be using the right word with protectorate. I'm kind of tired right now. But you get what I mean, right? You could just sit there and say, we wish to have something of our own, as you do. We wish to become our own little self. We wish to secede. We wish your help, your legal aid in doing so. We'll handle most of the resources and expenses ourselves. We can pay our own way. But that's not what Byron does. Byron lies, gets in front of them, and then says, so, Vorlon's made us, blah, 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 and therefore you owe us, and we're basically slaves, inside and sight. So we demand this, and if you don't, we'll get rid of we'll give all your secrets away. Bye. Pro tip. Most people don't respond well to threats. Even if a threat will eventually work, I guarantee you that initial reaction ain't going to be pretty. So then, of course, what happens is one telepath decides to leave the group because he's a moron, basically. I mean, Byron flat out says, we need to stay here. And the other guy's like, well, we need supplies. No, we need... I said to stay here for very good reason. And then Byron, despite his general stupidity, outlines why he wanted everyone to stay here. And he's right. In this one thing, he is right. After laying down, dropping the mic like that, they needed to have solidarity. They needed to literally, physically be in the same room. Otherwise, a lot of bad things could happen, including what actually happened. And of course Lita wants to stay. Of course she does. Ignoring the fact that she's got the hots for him, which is a factor, by the way. There's also the fact that he is, for all his flaws, fairly charismatic. And he's a flag for something that she cares about. So, after all the crap she's gone through, of course she wants to stay with this guy. Of course she wants to stay by his side and be a part of his cause. Where else is she going to go? What else is she going to do, right? I mean, who else is out there that actually cares about her? Zach? I mean, he just cares about her because he's got the hots for her, right? There's no actual friendship there. Or is there? I mean, I don't know. But what's going through her mind is the important part. I get frustrated at this sort of thing, even though it makes perfect sense. This is an example of good writing, not bad. This is a mess. And it's going to get worse. Yay! I'll see you next time, guys.